Hello and welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. I'm Somi Sorang with our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the program.
Good to be back again.
Hello.
Following the impasse in denuclearization and peace talks in the aftermath of the no-deal Hanoi summit, the two Koreas and the regional powers are stepping up their diplomatic game once more, starting with a summit between Presidents Moon Jae-in and Donald Trump. So on this week's edition of Foreign Correspondents, we sit down with our panel of journalists to talk more about the diplomatic efforts being made by the two Koreas and the regional powers, and what developments we can expect to see on the peninsula in the coming months. On April 11th, South Korean President Moon Jae-in and U.S. President Donald Trump held a summit in Washington to discuss North Korea's nuclear issue.
중요한 것은 대화의 모멘텀을 계속 유지시켜 나가고 또 가까운 시일 내에 제3차 북미회담이 열릴 수 있으리라는 그런 전망을 세계에 심어주는 것이 중요하다고 생각합니다.
I think North Korea has a tremendous potential, and I believe that President Moon agrees with that, and we will be discussing that and even potential meetings, further meetings with North Korea and Kim Jong-un.
So Stan, what were your overall thoughts about this summit?
Well, I've seen no surprises during the summit. Everything basically went as was expected. So U.S. is not going to leave the majority of the sanctions, and South Korea is still going to push for reopening the dialogue with the North.
Okay. And what about you, Frank?
Well, I kind of agree with Stan. I think that Moon Jae-in is continuing to push dialogue as a solution to this problem and not a return to the escalation that we saw in 2017. We also saw a little bit of movement from the United States. Mike Pompeo, just a couple days before the summit, mentioned that there is a little bit of room for some type of sanctions relief, provided Pyongyang made some type of meaningful steps toward denuclearization. So we are seeing a little bit of wiggle room, and Moon Jae-in's Korea Peace Initiative sort of take hold a little bit. I think it will be tough for there to be some type of significant agreement between the U.S. and North Korea, or significant negotiations even between the U.S. and North Korea, while we see the attention in the United States move toward the election, the 2020 presidential election there.
Right. But do you think we made any progress?
I mean, at least Moon Jae-in achieved like the bare minimum. He managed to get sure that the United States and Donald Trump are still committed to dialogue with North Korea, but unfortunately the United States are still committed to what they call the big deal approach. And this, I think won't work. You have to try a step-by-step approach, and it seemed that Donald Trump really didn't budge on that issue. Moon Jae-in wants as well to restart the inter-Korean cooperation, so he needs partial sanction relief, and we didn't get anything. So it's really the bare minimum.
So do you think the two sides, North Korea and the U.S., will resume their dialogue as a result of this summit?
Yeah, I think that, again, I mentioned before the 2020 presidential elections in the United States. I think that's going to be the main area of concentration for the U.S. president, to have some big summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, now with attention kind of diverted to that other, for the U.S. president, more important issue, I find somewhat unlikely, especially given the outcome of Hanoi and the kind of unlikelihood of North Korea accepting a big deal, or the U.S. accepting a smaller deal that would satisfy movement. I think there might be a little bit of movement and chances for South Korea to move in terms of inter-Korean exchanges and cooperation, not necessarily reopening Mount Gumgang or reopening the Gaesong Industrial Complex, but certainly we will see, I believe, more humanitarian aid and toward North Korea in the coming months. I think that's something that probably came out of this summit. It's hard to really analyze it because, you know, in terms of public relations and political communications, they're not going to say very much immediately after the U.S. South Korea-U.S.summit. The results of the summit will come out, I believe, in the coming months.
I think eventually they will. As Frank mentioned, we heard some interesting declaration from Pompeo. And on Friday, the two presidents, the United States and the South Korean president, they said that the top-down approach will continue to be indispensable. So that seems to indicate that the symmetry will continue. And I think North Korea, as long as North Korea doesn't do any provocation, and I mean, North Korea made some declaration that some people thought were a bit threatening. They say we'll deal a serious blow. They use this expression, but actually, if you look at what they actually said, I mean, they want to continue their economic development. They're not bringing back the military threat. So I think I think it will happen eventually.
Okay, now President Moon Jae-in, he's been called the mediator or the negotiator in the media. Do you think that's an appropriate moniker for him, especially with regards to this latest summit? I
mean, yes and no. In a sense, he did last year manage spectacularly well to bring the US and North Korea together, and to start a dialogue. But I think the definition of mediator is somebody who is neutral. And he's not neutral. He's part of the issue too. I mean, he has his own national interest. So, the answer would be yes and no.
Yes and no. And Stan, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I agree with Fred because last year, obviously, President Moon Jae-in was in the driver's seat of the negotiations. But this year, it looks like that after the Hanoi summit, North Korea is turning the cold shoulder to the South. And that makes President Moon's position a bit shaky because of that. The President Moon, he put a lot on the line with his North Korean policy, with the rapprochement policy. And this behavior from the North doesn't play well for him. So I would say also yes and no.
Mixed opinions?
Yeah. I would say definitely yes. I think that having, again, this sort of mini-summit with the U.S. president is indicative of that. What Moon Jae-in, I think, is going to try to do is continuing to have these small summits with either U.S. President Donald Trump or North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, just to maintain sort of the status quo and prevent things from slipping back to where they were in 2017. Even though you're not going to see, progress in terms of North Korean denuclearization or a lifting of sanctions, he doesn't want to see things move back. And by maintaining these communication lines at a high level, I think he'll be able to do that, at least until we see, again, presidential elections in 2020 and the likelihood of being able to move past this and resolve North Korea's denuclearization and a relief of sanctions, in the coming years.
Okay. Now, let's have a look at some numbers to do with South Korea and U.S. summit. Since taking office nearly 2 years ago, President Moon Jae-in has held a total of 7 summits with President Trump. This compares to the average for previous South Korean leaders, 8 summits with their U.S. counterparts during the entire 4-year term. Do you think it's meaningful in any way that President Moon Jae-in, compared to his predecessors, has held more summits with his U.S. counterpart?
Yes, definitely. I mean, Donald Trump is such an unusual president who is willing to challenge the status quo, is willing to talk to North Korea, is willing to have as many summits as necessary. So I think Moon Jae-in really senses that there is a historic opportunity, like all the planets are aligned. So he needs to talk to him. He needs to continue dialogue. He needs to see like what role can he play to mediate, to fight, to help, to bring North Korea to the table. I mean, I think he's doing what needs to be done, and I think I think he really understood that with Donald Trump he had a chance to really bring a solution to the Korean Peninsula and the North Korean issue.
And do you think with so many summits, significant progress has been made so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, we're in a different position than we were under Obama's strategic patience. And again, I think Moon Jae-in's meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump he's recognized that perhaps the U.S. president has a very limited attention span. He's well known for acting on the last person that had his ear, and by meeting with him on a frequent basis, he's reminding the U.S. president that diplomacy really is the best path to take with North Korea.
Now, we kept talking about the big deal, right? The South Korean government has proposed a so-called good enough deal as an alternative to the big deal that's been sought by the US in regards to North Korea. This is seen as a compromise between Washington's all-or-nothing approach and that of North Korea to gradually phase in progress.
우리 입장의 일괄 타결을 위해 단계적 이행입니다. 그렇기 때문에 중간에 서서 뭘 한다기보다는 만나서 먼저 이야기를 하는 게 저희들이 더 중요하다고 생각을 하고.
Stan, what's your view on this good enough deal that's been proposed by the South Korean government?
I think that could be quite a good first step. Honestly, in my personal opinion, this step-by-step approach is more viable than the approach taken by the United States, like all or nothing.
More viable, more realistic?
Yeah, because North Korea have already demonstrated that they would not agree to that. So they would offer small steps after small steps, and followed by rapprochement from the United States. The biggest question is how far North Korea is ready to go, because basically many experts say that North Korea does not really need Yongbyon complex anymore, and that is why they are willing and they are ready to sacrifice it in exchange for relief from the sanctions. But there was information that the list of the American demands consists of about 38 or around 40 objects that are connected to North Korean nuclear program. And will North Korea accept that? Will they be ready to do that, not in one time, but even gradually? That is the big question. And will United States agree to ease sanctions step by step? That's also a question.
Frank, do you also agree that this good enough deal would be a good starting point?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think North Korea is going to go for the big deal. After all, the big deal isn't really a deal. If North Korea gives up its nuclear and missile programs, it will be adhering to the demands within the sanctions. It's not any degree of compromise from the United States. A smaller deal that's been sort of floated by South Korea is some degree of compromise, and again will move the ball toward North Korea denuclearizing and opening up from its isolation and giving it some economic opportunity.
Right.
And if I can add something,
Sure.
I mean, you cannot overcome 70 years of hostility like that easily. That's why this, and something that US doesn't understand, and I think South Korea really understands, is that you have to transform the relationship. Like the dialogue and negotiation is not only about making a deal, it's about improving the relation, transforming it, so things that are impossible now becomes possible later. That's why step-by-step approach is, to my personal opinion, the only way to go. Because when you transform your relationship, you see things differently and things that were a threat are not threat anymore. And then you can do more compromise.
Okay. Now, regarding this latest summit to the US, the latest Seoul-Washington summit, the Blue House said that it would continue to take a top-down approach on North Korea's denuclearization.
문 대통령의 이번 미국 방문은 탑다운식 접근을 지속하면서 한반도의 완전한 비핵화의 항구적 평화 정착을 위한 구체적 방안을 모색하는 계기가 될 것으로 기대됩니다.
양 정상은 톱다운 방식이 앞으로도 한반도 평화 프로세스의 필수적이라는 데 대해 인식을 같이 했습니다.
However, some critics say that post-Hanoi, this top-down approach has serious limitations as an effective tool to solve North Korea's nuclear issue. Now, after this method's failure in Hanoi, why do you think South Korea and the US are still going on with this top-down approach?
Well, I do not think that it was a failure, as there is no other way in dealing with North Korea other than top-down approach. Because in North Korea there is only one person, only one man who is in charge and who can take decisions, and that is Kim Jong-un. And everything he does goes from top to down. And accordingly, the other countries, the other participants of the talks also have to take the same approach. Otherwise, it just wouldn't work out. So I think this is quite reasonable, and it's the only way to solve that issue.
Then do you think a bottom-up approach would have been unviable?
Yeah, I think actually a little bit of a medium-up approach was what was taken in Hanoi. I think perhaps Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump's National Security Advisor John Bolton had a disproportionate amount of influence over Trump's so-called big deal, and that may have even been, some analysis suggests it was a setup, and they knew that North Korea wasn't going to accept it and was going to walk away as part of their sort of long play in negotiating with North Korea. One of the benefits of that top-down approach was the initial acceptance of Donald Trump that surprised everybody when he accepted that first summit. And we've been kind of enjoying the benefits of that so far. I think that was really weakened in the run-up to the Hanoi summit and through the Hanoi summit. And I think, it might be beneficial, while I don't want to sing Donald Trump's praises, certainly on a number of other issues. On this issue, and taking it out of the hands of, very conservative, hawkish bureaucrats, we've seen some benefits here, and hopefully he can regain that initiative.
So continue on with the top-down approach, do you think?
I mean, I totally agree with what you said. In North Korea, there is only one person you need to convince. And of course, like working level preparation, they are important. You need to prepare the groundwork, you need to discuss options. But in North Korea, these officials, this mid-level official, even higher-level official, they cannot take any initiative. They cannot push any of their own idea. Like they cannot take any risk. So really, the only person you really need to talk to is Kim Jong-un. So yeah, I think that's the only way to continue. And as Frank said so far, I mean, we see the benefits. We are now in a much better situation than we were two years ago.
So perhaps it's the only way possible right now.
I think so.
On the day of the South Korea-U.S.summit, the Supreme People's Assembly of the Workers' Party gathered for a full session in Pyongyang. This marks the first meeting since around half of the assembly members were replaced in March. Stan, do you think that Kim Jong-un's position within North Korea's elite has changed somewhat following the breakdown in talks at the Hanoi summit?
No, I don't think it has changed a little bit even. We have to understand that all those so-called changes in the North Korean hierarchy, they do not really affect the true leadership of the country. The recent changes maybe even more strengthened his position and strengthened it also among the people. He may have become even more popular.
Yeah, there is one promotion that I thought was significant last week. Choi Son-hee, who is one of his closest aides and she's one of the top negotiators. She was one of the top negotiators in Hanoi, and she got promoted. Now she's part of the State Affairs Commission, which is like highest governing body in North Korea. And I think her nomination and her promotion shows that dialogue still seems to be, I mean, it's always difficult to guess what's happening in Pyongyang, but for me, I think this nomination shows that dialogue is still the best option for among the North Korean elite.
So what do you think North Korea's calculations or thoughts are on this latest summit between Seoul and Washington?
I think it's questioning, and you heard that right after the summit, it's questioning whether the U.S. is serious about ever relieving sanctions from North Korea. We need to remember that, having nuclear weapons isn't the only reason that the U.S. sanctions countries. They sanction them for any number of reasons. So, and also we heard from Stan how the U.S. is kind of moving the goalposts now. Instead of just being nuclear weapons and long-range missiles, it's now WMDs and other missiles of medium-range missiles of North Korea. Is that going to continue to happen as North Korea takes steps toward denuclearization? So, I think really that came out of the Hanoi summit, where the U.S. came with actually no deal, nothing different than would happen if North Korea unilaterally denuclearized, because they said, we're going to wait until after you've given everything up before we give you any sanctions relief. So North Korea, again, I think is really questioning whether the U.S. is serious about following through on any of its commitments.
Now, on the international diplomatic front, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is once again eager to make his presence known after a brief hiatus that followed the Hanoi summit. Rumors are abound regarding a possible North Korea-Russia summit in the near future, following reports that one of Kim Jong-un's top aides had visited Russia back in March. Stan, do you think we might see a possible North Korea-Russia summit in the near future?
Yeah, I think we could see that. The problem is that the date is not set yet, and as far as I understand, judging from the presidential administration of Russia, even the agenda is not set yet. So it's really hard to predict when the summit could take place and even whether it would take place, depending on what happens in the next few months. As we see that Trump have promised to visit South Korea, and that they were talking about having a trilateral summit with Kim Jong-un also. There are really way too many things that could interfere into that process. But I would say that, yeah, it is quite possible because the North Korea-Russia summits have not been held for like almost 20 years by now. It was in 2001 when President Putin, he visited Pyongyang, and next year Kim Jong-un also visited Russia, so it was in 2002. Yeah. I think the two countries have some things to discuss.
Right. Recently, large festivities were held in China to celebrate the 70th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Pyongyang and Beijing, as well as the one-year anniversary of Kim Jong-un's visit to China. Analysts say China and North Korea may be eager to demonstrate close bilateral ties amid recent strains seen in North Korea-U.S. relations. How do you forecast the North Korea and China relations going from here onwards in light of the recent summit?
I think they will continue to warm up. North Korea needs to escape its isolation. They need some backup in case the talk with the US completely collapse. And we already see some signs of interesting signs. I mean, very recently, North Korea and China, they opened a new, what you call a border crossing in the Jilin province. It was a big infrastructure costing like, I think it was around $40 million. So that showed that like the two countries have in mind like the idea of continuing trade. So trade will go on. So I do think the links and the relation will continue to warm up.
Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Fred. I also think that because of the sort of hardline position that the U.S. took at Hanoi and is taking in negotiations with North Korea, an improving relation between North Korea and China is more likely, and China kind of undermining the sanctions a little bit with North Korea in trade is more likely. And so that will increase perhaps the incentive on the U.S. to accept something of a small deal to get the ball rolling toward denuclearization.
Okay. Now, Chairman Kim Jong-un, he has visited China 4 times, and there are growing rumors that Chinese President Xi Jinping could embark on a reciprocal visit to North Korea soon. Stan, in your view, when's the most likely timeline of Xi Jinping visiting North Korea?
Oh, any time is good.
Anytime is good, anytime is good, and anytime is likely?
You know, I would say that probably May or June would be a good time, because by that time the experts would understand what is going on and how the situation with North Korea is between North Korea, U.S. and South Korea is developing. Then China and North Korea could adjust their relations and discuss what could be done too.
Okay, so let's move on from China to Vietnam. Because over in Vietnam, North Korea recently appointed a new ambassador to the Southeast Asian country, with many analysts saying the move is part of the regime's efforts to boost its ties with Vietnam. What are your thoughts on North Korea's efforts to boost its ties with Vietnam?
I mean, I think once again, North Korea tried to escape from isolation. They tried to make new allies or like strengthen their relation with their allies. And I think I see that as a positive thing as well. I mean, I think Vietnam can be a very good model, economic model for North Korea, because I mean they kept, like the communist regime kept its power, but still developed its economy. So the fact that after the summit, Kim Jong-un met the Vietnamese leadership, and they decided to strengthen their relationship is probably a good thing.
Probably a good thing. Promising for you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Fred. It's a perfect example for North Korea to maybe allay those concerns that if it does reform its economy, it will also involve a political reformation. That's not what really happened in Vietnam, and they've been reaping the economic benefits of that. And it also provides a path for North Korea to see how a changed relationship with the United States can move. Both countries have a history of war with the United States, and Vietnam and the U.S. managed to overcome that and again develop better relations to the benefit of Vietnam. So perhaps Kim Jong-un can learn from that.
Okay, all right. We'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Negotiations over North Korea's denuclearization and peace on the peninsula appears to have gained fresh momentum following the latest South Korea-U.S.summit. Despite their differences, there is little doubt that all of the regional powers have the common goal of peace in mind for both the region and the wider globe. That's all for this week. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.